Welcome to the Wide Lens podcast, where expanding your perspective on recent history is our mission. Listen to untold accounts from overlooked voices and see familiar stories in a whole new light. Ready to dive deeper? Let's begin.
Hey folks, on this episode we're interviewing Odoi Odotei. Odoi lives in Memphis, Tennessee with his family, and he works at an international charity. But if we go back to the summer of 1995, he was an intern in the Bill Clinton White House, alongside another famous intern you might have heard of, Monica Lewinsky. Now we're going to unpack his experience and hear directly from Odoi on what it was like to find himself in the middle of such a pivotal time in U.S. history. Welcome to the Wide Lens podcast, Odoi. It is so good to have you.
Oh, such a pleasure, Brad, to be with you and to be able to share about my crazy past. Excited. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, as crazy as your past will be, we are just going to focus in on this little bit of it, although I'm sure you've got so much more than just that. Okay, so Odoi, first question I've got for you that folks are just going to want to hear is, how did this come about? How did you become an intern at the White House? That's something very few people get to do.
Yeah. So, to be honest with you, it was kind of an opportunity that I came about scattershot sort of way. I was a sophomore at Harvard University looking for some summer opportunities where I could gain some professional experience. And most importantly, I was needing to go to a place where I could make a little bit of money. I wasn't in a place financially where I could cover my total tuition via scholarship. So I wanted to bring in a few dollars over the summer and get some professional experience. You know, and being a Harvard student, I was looking at some of these amazing places to consider interning that would be receptive to having a Harvard student apply. So I don't remember all the places I applied to. I remember that I applied to the White House because that was one that stood out to me. And I was interested in government and wanted to know how the federal government worked. I also applied to MTV at the same time because I was also interested in film, entertainment, music, that whole side of things.
So backtracking a little bit, I got to hear about this MTV thing. What did you apply for? Like, what did you think if you were going to be at MTV? What were they going to have you do?
Man, I can't remember specifically. This is back when like everything was done via snail mail. Like it wasn't even like we had the benefit of the internet or being able to apply online to things. I think I found a book with a bunch of internship opportunities, and you'd write in, you'd send a cover letter, send in a general application, and, you know, hope to hear back with some sort of response. I just remember getting a piece of actual physical mail from MTV saying, "Thank you for your application. You didn't get the internship." So for whatever reason, I thought, I wasn't competitive enough for MTV, but I was attractive and competitive enough for the federal government, for the White House.
Ignored by MTV, but the White House has come aboard. I love it.
Yeah. And I remember when I got the White House approved, the acceptance, I was quite excited, but then I realized that they weren't going to actually pay anything. It was a free, you had to work for free as an intern. And so I actually just put the opportunity on the back burner. I wasn't thinking I was going to pursue it. I didn't tell my parents, didn't tell anyone, because I thought, I can't afford to do this. I need to make some money. And it wasn't until I told an aunt and uncle of mine about the opportunity, and they said, you by all means have to do this. And they said, what if we were to give you the equivalent of what you'd make over the summer so you could take on this great opportunity at the White House? And I said, yeah, if you're willing to give me the money, then I will certainly do it. And that's when I decided to accept the opportunity from the old White House to serve with.
Well, that's so gracious of an aunt and uncle to provide something like that for you. Is that something that if you had the means and you had a niece or nephew in a similar experience, you'd probably reciprocate today?
Oh, definitely. You want to invest in the dreams and ideas of young people and help them to experience different opportunities that are out there for them. So most definitely, even if my own son, a niece or nephew, if I have the means to support, would want to do that. And the White House was certainly one that was worthy of that sort of investment. So So grateful for them, their investment. They've continued to invest in my life over the years. So it was a huge blessing. Yeah.
Odoi, that's great. That's so good to hear. So you referenced a little bit about, I mean, I love how, one of the things that you really had in your favor of becoming an intern at the White House is it sounds like you had a lot of just like tenacity when you were a young college student. You found a book, you knew where to send your internship application to, and you did it. I mean, with the advent of the internet around that time, and of course, in the early 2000s, it's getting used more and more. Super easy for folks to just do that electronically, so they just get inundated with applications. And so that was something that, allowed you to be probably one of thousands, but not one of tens of thousands of applicants into a program like that. So that's exciting. So you basically used that book, and it had a lot of different ideas on how you could intern, where you could intern from, and you just kind of chose the ones you were most interested in. Is that right?
Yeah, that's my memory of it. And I think I also had the benefit of being at Harvard University, where there were other students who were likely applying to similar internships. I, if memory serves, there were one or two other Harvard students that also were accepted into the internship program. But to be honest with you, I wasn't particularly close to them as friends, or we didn't kind of cabal together to apply and
Right.
kind of plot out. I just think being in that environment in general with a bunch of overachievers and people that are kind of in the know helped me pursue it with gusto and intensity. But as I said, because it wasn't paid, it was one of those things where I got in and I thought, oh, well, I have to pass on this. And so for so long, I remember I wasn't until like the very last minute that I actually sent in my acceptance, and it was fortunate enough to still be able to be brought into the internship class at that point. So yeah,
That's
it
neat. I
was
mean, that's
it was good.
that's a story in of itself to say like I denied the White House an internship. I mean, not many people would do that. So that's incredible. So you get the internship, you say yes to it. Aunt and uncle help you out. You're there. You get to DC. Did you just drive down to DC from Boston, or were you living somewhere else at the time?
Yeah, I was living in Upper St. Clair, Pennsylvania, a little township right outside of Pittsburgh, PA. So went home after my sophomore year to PA, spent a little time with the family, and then drove from PA to DC. I ended up staying with another uncle of mine, my father's brother, who lived right outside the city, about 45 minutes or so outside of DC. And he let me stay with him in his apartment. And so, yeah, the time was really interesting, Brad, because I remember having to leave his home every morning at like some ungodly hour, like 5 a.m. or something, to to make sure that we were able to commute into the city, and I was able to arrive on time at the old executive office building where my office was for my internship. So it was a really intense in that I'd get up at 5 a.m., go get to the DC office by 8 a.m., do my work, leave at 5, get home, 7 or 8 p.m., and just do it all over again for the weeks that I was there. So it was very intense. Really, I was really, really focused on the internship work in and of itself. That was probably my primary focus time. There wasn't a lot of socializing. I didn't spend a lot of time. There were a few days like where I'd go out with interns and do some fun things, but most of it was, head down, nose to the grindstone, working on the internship stuff.
That time constraint really made it a rinse cycle repeat for you. That you probably really looked forward to your weekends, and goodness, that's tough. That's that's a real grind, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you're 19 years old. You're having to wear a suit and tie every day. It's not, it's not what the average 19-year-old would want to do. But it was. I really appreciated the work. It felt like important work, and so that was a great motivator to keep to it, to focus on it. So yeah, love that aspect.
How many interns would you say in total were a part of the program?
Good question. I'd have to go back and look specifically, but I'd say somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60, maybe more. There was a famous photo of all of us that was taken with Bill Clinton, where we were all together at one time. That was kind of unusual. We all worked in different offices in the federal administration. So we would be in different places. And I think in that one photo, roughly 50, 60 of us, I'd say, maybe more, maybe more.
Right, right. And so, I mean, I guess that's pretty special that only 50 or 60 college kids are there and a handful of them are from Harvard. So you guys had pretty good representation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the time, Harvard was the number one school in the country, world renowned. So it made sense. It was strange though for me. Like as I mentioned, like I don't feel like I knew my other Harvard students very well. In fact, there was one guy in particular. I remember I met him after the internship, and we were like, "Oh, were you there? Like you were, you were
You
in
like
DC too?"
you look at the big photo and spot each other, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So, yeah, it was. I remember there were a couple other interns in my particular office that I knew, but we didn't go to school together. But it was, we connected because we were working in the same space together. So.
Odoi, could they relate to you? Were others having to do something similar where they're staying with family and they're commuting in or did a lot of them like live in a house together close to the White House? Did they live in DC? What was their experience like? Did any of it replicate what you went through or was it a bit different?
There was a mix. I can't recall exactly everyone's story, but I think everyone had a mix. There were people that were living closer, living in the city, having the benefit of being close to the capital, and others living outside, just like I was. So, yeah, I feel like I was kind of, for lack of a better term, a nerd among nerds. Like I was kind of the guy that just kind of kept to himself, was a little quiet, a little sheepish, more introverted. So I wasn't really seeking out a lot of social time with the young people, which seems strange to me because that's not how I am now. I probably would have been the opposite. If as I grew older, I would have been more active and attentive to trying to get to know people in that way. But young 19-year-old, a little more kept inclusive, I guess, kept to myself.
Well, it's kind of cool how, throughout the years you've just become someone who's more and more engaging and that's the direction we want to go. So that's a positive.
Yeah, yeah.
So you show up first day, what's it like? You get there. What was the first day like? Were you pretty I mean, we like kind of like I mean, you've been at Harvard for a year or so, maybe 2 years. That's a incredibly unique experience in and of itself. You're now at the White House. What was that? You going through those doors. What was that first day like?
I remember being huddled into a room with a bunch of other interns and we kind of given like a security briefing of some sort. We'd already filled out some security paperwork to be able to be allowed to work there. But I remember feeling kind of formal initially. And if memory serves, Brett, again, this was 30 years ago. I remember it felt like we went from the security briefing directly into the place where we were to work. And it was exciting. So I worked in the White House communications office and we received letters from the general public, people that were wanting to write to the president on a variety of different issues. Everything from like a mother and father sending their baby announcement saying that they wanted the president to know and bless their baby or, to people actually writing about particular issues in the media, issues in politics that they wanted the president to have on their radar. So we felt like we were sorting through the nation's mind around topics and issues of the day. And that was really fascinating to me. I still, to this day, that was probably the best part of it. We would create daily issue reports that we'd actually feed up to the president's office around issues that were coming up that were of interest to his constituents. And so in that regard, we felt like we were keeping our finger on the pulse, on the heartbeat of the country. And we're giving them a voice to speak into the executive leadership of our nation. Yeah.
So did you have to take every communication coming into the White House pretty seriously? Like, did you have like a process to confirm that you received it, that you responded to it? And, regardless if it's, hey, I want you to come to my birthday party to, hey, I'm really frustrated with this policy that you just enacted, right? I'm sure it was probably from real lackadaisical stuff to real policy driven commentary that was coming through. Was there a pretty prescribed process for you guys?
There was, but once again, you have to realize this is way before the advent of the internet, We weren't using computers. Everything was pretty much done by hand, which, it just seems so antiquated now. But I remember opening letters by hand and organizing them by topic and issue. We also oversaw the 1-800 number to the White House. So we actually received calls, listened to voice messages, and kind of aggregate the themes and ideas that were coming from those as well. So I remember at the time, a couple of big issues. The war in Bosnia and Herzegovina was going on. So many people were calling in with perspective on that. There was an African-American journalist, Mumia Abu Jamal. I mean, people were calling in and saying that this gentleman had been falsely imprisoned for murder. So we're receiving calls about that. And then, of course, it's sort of innocuous ones. People, like I said, with with baby announcements and things of that nature that we'd have to respond to. We did have a process for responding, providing an auto pen signed letter from the president for those who were writing in about specific things. And that was, a large amount of our time was organizing that communication to share back to the president, and then also responding to that communication in a heartfelt way from president's office as well.
So, Odoi, did you think like, yeah, this relates to my degree. I love comms. I want to work in the comms department. Or did they pretty much just tell you, Odoi, this is where you're gonna be? How did you land on that specifically?
I believe I had an opportunity to check different offices that I could potentially be given the opportunity to work in, and then they would assign you to one of your top ones. I chose communications because I was interested in the potential of working in government. The idea of media and comms was of interest to me. I think that's why I also looked into like MTV and other.
Sure.
I was always kind of thinking in those general directions. But to be honest, I didn't know specifically what the White House Communications Office was going to focus in on. And this particular facet of their comms looked at that public facing piece. Like what are people speaking to the president or wanting to share with the president about who they were and issues that of the day that were drawing their focus and interest.
And what did that look like for you in regards to the other interns? I'm assuming like a handful of other interns broke away from that large pack of 50 or 60 of them and were in your department, your specific area as well. Did you sit next to them? Did you connect with them? Did you get to know them as you guys were, as you shared physically processing through all of those communications?
Yeah, there was some connection. I don't remember getting incredibly close to anyone. It was, you know, really, I at the time was really just wanting to understand, is this a career path that I would be interested in? And I remember having a lot of interest in trying to understand the aides, the people that were a little bit older than myself who were working in that office and what they were doing and how I could emulate them. That was really my focus. So I remember there were a couple of gentlemen who were probably in their mid 20s, late 20s, who had come in and I was just really impressed with their ability to kind of navigate the old executive office building and the responsibilities that they had. My particular boss was one of them, and I was watching him very closely, trying to figure out what I do next. But strangely enough, Brad, I feel like what I learned in that time was that, and this was the sad thing that kind of made me veer away from the work in DC, was that so many of them weren't actually interested in public service. They were more interested in sort of how they could climb the ladder and gain more position and power. And that was really disconcerting to me. I felt like I something in my heart was telling me after I got to see and learn more about who these leaders were, what they were doing, I realized over time, I these aren't individuals that I really want to follow in the footsteps of. I could probably use my abilities better elsewhere.
So that was a place of real clarity for you and a real moment of sobriety. And looking back 30 years, we can probably now say like, well, of course, I mean, we can just see self, focus and people really utilizing politics and in government for their own benefit is, yeah, it's super commonplace. But you were a bit of a naive, young, influential young person and thought like, hey, this is a place where I can really put the country and policies and service over myself. But that example just wasn't given to you that much. I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember, there was a particular situation that arose. I was manning the phones for the 1-800 number one day, and we would receive calls directly from people. And there was a woman that called in, really plaintive and in need. She was the sister of the pilot of Air Force Two, which I think is like the helicopter, not the big plane, but the helicopter that the president oftentimes will take. And because of her being the sister, she felt like she was due some deeper consideration. And this woman had experienced lupus, this debilitating disease, and was struggling to pay her rent. And I remember being a naive 19-year-old intern, I thought, what can I do to help support this woman? And I remember running around the old executive office building to different offices, trying to see, is there anything that we can do? Something about her story really struck me as being one that, if I could help one person today, how can I help this woman get money for her rent because she was close to being evicted? And I remember there was nothing I could do at that level. Like there was, there was no supports that I could garner for her. And it was really disappointing to me. And I remember I thought to myself, I don't want to be in a position where I'm not able to help this, the common person around me with the supports they need. I'd rather, even if I'm not working at the level of these levers of power that create, you know, legal change and policy change, I would rather be more influential with the needs of the common person on the ground than not. And so that was an eye-opening experience. It's still to this day, I think, has informed my way of thinking about service.
That's great. That's great. That's really good. So let's go straight to the president. Do you remember, Odoi, the first time that you had a chance to meet him? What was that like? What was the context of that? And yeah, what are some of your memories of that?
Oh yeah, I definitely remember meeting Bill Clinton for the very first time. You have to remember back in that period, he was kind of like, well, at least to me, it felt like the first celebrity president, like prior to Clinton, we're talking Bush and Ronald Reagan, and like these guys were older, stodgier guys. Clinton felt young and hip, and
I mean,
he
this is the same guy that played the saxophone on the
on
Arsenio
Arsenio
Hall show.
Hall show. Exactly.
Yes,
He was cool. He was a cool guy. He was the McDonald's loving guy, and like
that's right.
he was young and vibrant, and I remember the very first time I met him. I don't remember what exactly the event was, but he was basically all many of the interns were lined up in a row, and he was going down the row and shaking each of our hands and asking each of our names. And when he got to me and shook my hand, he looked directly in my eyes, shook my hand, asked me my name, and it was like I was his entire world. And now in hindsight, I realize indeed I was. Like Bill Clinton was known for having this magnetic personality and this amazing mind to remember the names of people and remember not only their names, but situations and issues that were affecting them individually. He had that gift. And in that moment, I remember he like, he zeroed in on me, looked me in the eye and was like, Odoi Odotei. Like he memorized it. And what I recall was when I met him a second time, he remembered my name. And,
Mm.
I mean, here I am
And I mean,
amongst,
let's be honest. Your name's not Ralph or Sam or Bill. That'd be really easy for him. It's a tough one.
it was a tough one. And I felt like if I were to probe him, he probably would have like been able to tell me things about my person. He just was so charismatic and so gifted. It blew me away. And that really made an impression on me. I thought to myself, like, I want to be like that. I want to be a guy that like, you meet people in a room one time and then days later, you still remember them. You remember the name of their mother. Or you remember, you remember what was ailing them. That was a formative memory for me. And I was really impressed and so grateful to have that first meeting And I think I got to meet him 2 or 3 more times after that. And they were certainly the highlights of the summer, being able to spend time with the president.
Did you see him? I mean, you met him a few times, but was he just kind of like roaming the halls? Was he? I'm not saying that he was like not busy. He's probably had staffers with him and whatnot. But was he just out and about and around the White House often, or was it 9 times out of 10 you just don't see him there? You're there, but you don't see the president.
Oh, no, no. He wasn't roaming. It wasn't like he had a casual schedule where he could just kind of pop in and say hello. His schedule was very, very fixed. So when we did see him, it was during organized appearances and connections with us. So I think that first time he was just kind of doing an initial meet and greet of the interns. It was very quick. We didn't spend hours with him. The second time I recall, like, we actually got to go and sit around the perimeter of his birthday party. Was it his birthday? I think it was either his birthday party or Al Gore's birthday party. I think it was Al Gore's birthday party.
Adora, I'm checking right now for you. I'm
Okay.
checking people. I'm gonna see what's Al Gore's birthday. Let's see. This has got to be in the summer. Let's see. He is no, not Al Gore. Let's see. Maybe it
Okay.
was Clinton. So his birthday's March 31st, unless Clinton forgot that one. It was Clinton's August 19th.
Yeah. Yeah. So Clinton's birthday party. They remember they had the party out in, maybe it was the Rose Garden, some big space. Remember Janet Reno was there, George Stephanopoulos. It was like this really cool experience where you're seeing all
Odoi,
these.
these are the same folks that are being they're being played on SNL at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, Will Ferrell playing, Janet Reno, which I don't think
Yes,
they'd ever do again. Like, maybe they
yes.
would. They probably would do it, but like, it was so cool. And to make matters worse, they knew that they were kind of the butt of jokes, and they embraced it. They weren't sensitive about it. I remember at the time, Beavis and Butthead was a huge cultural thing happening on MTV, and there were these T-shirts that were going around DC that kind of put Bill Clinton and Al Gore's head on Beavis and Butthead or something like that. And at this birthday party, Clinton and Gore both wore matching Beavis and Butthead T-shirts over their shirts and ties, and it just kind of made it really fun. And you knew that they were able to take a joke and laugh at themselves. And Jimmy Buffett, the great Jimmy Buffett, was brought in to play and serenade the president. So Margaritaville
Margaritaville.
was being played, and it was a different time, man. It was very cool and chill, and I loved it. That was another highlight. I felt like, wow, this is, you know, you're seeing the celebrity as well as the fun and looseness of that period of time. We were dealing with heavy issues, but they knew how to kick back and have fun. So,
Adoy, did you bring some of these stories back to your aunt and uncle that essentially paid for that summer for you to be able to do that? Did you kind of like that was kind of like your payment to them and share? Hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm seeing, and they were living, I guess, in some way vicariously through you.
oh, you better believe it. I told them stories at that time in great detail about all that was going on, and they were just over the moon to be able to support and hear and live vicariously through their grateful nephew. So yeah, it was wonderful. That was really great.
Was there any other like White House leadership that you really connected to, or was there anyone else that really made an impression upon you? I know if it was me, it's 95. I'm in the Clinton White House. I probably have delusions of grandeur saying like, I'm going to become best friends with Bill Clinton. I'm going to see him every day. We're going to become blood brothers, that kind of thing. And then you realize, okay, I'm going to see him a couple times, but there's these other folks that are in leadership that I get to see more often that can really impact me. Was there anyone that really stood out for you?
Yeah, my boss, who was a young aide, I don't remember his last name, but I remember his first name was Patrick. He was just the epitome of cool what Washington guy. I remember he had the beautiful pompadour hair of the 90s at that time, just so slick back, and had uh, suspenders that they weren't corny. He looked well put together. And the entire time I'm thinking to myself, like, this guy knows what he's doing. He had the image, he had the the swagger. He seemed like he was just, on his way up the ladder with regard to being in politics. But strangely enough, Brad, I remember talking to him and having some deep conversations. And as I mentioned earlier, he wasn't very interested in public service. He was actually angling to leave DC and go work in the film industry. That was his big thing. He was like, he wanted to get as many stories as he could from his time in DC and leverage them in Hollywood. So I don't know where this guy is today. He's probably some big at Universal Pictures or, you know, Paramount or whatever it might be. But at that time, I remember, wow, he's like the guy I want to be, but he was also looking to get and move out of that work. So
did the other interns feel the same way? Like he was someone like, we could maybe come back here as an aide someday and take on a role like his. Did he leave an impression on a lot of folks, or was it mainly you and he that connected?
yeah, I think people really looked up to me. He was a good looking guy. I remember the girls were enamored by him, and I remember that we had there was only one night, Brad, where I went out actually with my intern cohort and Patrick. You know, this shows you how loose things were. But yeah, I was 19 years old, and I remember they somehow got me into a bar, and I was able to go out and have a few beers and hang out with everybody, and it was totally it just felt like, wow, I'm like with the major players. And I remember watching this guy in his zone, kind of, glad handing and working a room at this place. And I felt special because they got me in and, I wasn't 21 and I was able to go. Yeah. So that sort of thing was really an eye-opening experience. He was, kind of like, how do I describe him? I'm really dating myself now. I was telling something the other day. Remember Family Ties and Michael J. Fox, Alex P. Keaton?
Alex P. Keaton.
He had that kind of he wasn't conservative like Alex P. Keaton, but he had that shirt and tie.
He had that style.
And I was like, this guy's cool. Like, he reminded me of Michael J. Fox, like a super cool guy. Yeah.
I was in DC for work maybe 10 years ago, and I went into a bar and looked over at, I was just sitting by myself at the bar, and there was an open stool next to me, and this guy with silvery hair jumps into the stool, and I look over at him. I'm like, I know this guy. How do I know this guy? And it was none other than CNN's Wolf Blitzer. So
wow.
this is DC for you. These people that you see on national news or these national politicians, they're just popping in and there from time to time, aren't they?
Yeah, you remember that show Murphy Brown? I think with
Candace Bergen, something. Yeah.
Remember they worked in the newsroom, but then they would go out to a local pub and they'd run to government officials and pundits and lobbyists and things. That's what it felt like. It was like there was one night and I just remember going out and feeling like, wow, this is the power center. It's actually happening at the pub and not inside the White House or the old executive office.
Was that show on the air at the time too?
Oh, I presume it was, but I can't recall the exact. I know that it was on, and then they actually brought it back, for.
Odoi, that show is a touchstone because I remember when that show was out. And do you remember what the controversy was around that show? Do you remember what it was?
No, I can't remember.
The controversy was Murphy Brown has a kid without having a husband. That's the controversy. And it made national news, and it was in every newspaper across the United States. And now in 2025, you just wouldn't, that's nothing, right? So it shows how culture really changes over time.
Yeah, I think back to that period, Brad, and of course, my claim to fame was that I was a part of the intern class with Monica Lewinsky. And, everyone knows the stories therein about what took place with her. And, everybody was just shocked by what could potentially happen at that period of time. The president and an intern, even though I don't think they didn't have their dalliance until she was an aide later on. It just seemed like, whoa, how could this ever happen? And now you think about it in hindsight, 30 years later, it's like, oh, that's, it seems like, given everything that's happening now in politics and sort of the looseness in which we embrace those sort of the ethics of our leaders, we've been on a slippery slope, I think, ever since, where we've allowed more and more of our leaders to kind of do whatever, as long as they continue to, push for the policies that we want to see happen in the United States. Their character, their morality, not as big of an issue as it was in the past.
I mean, Odoi, you're spot on, and I've thought about that in the past. And if you remember when Clinton was running against Bush won,
Mm.
the big controversy when he was running in that first election was, I smoked pot, but I didn't
Didn't
inhale.
inhale.
I didn't inhale, right? And it was just all over the news. And I remember when George Bush 2 was in, there was revelations that he actually did cocaine.
Mm.
And he did cocaine, right? And so it's just amazing in a short term of 8 years how one thing, which is I I had pot in my mouth, but I didn't put it in my lungs, to, yeah, I did cocaine, is a cultural shift that the country can actually do. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, the political controversies of that period. I remember who was the politician that got involved with Jessica Hahn, his assistant, and like just I remember everyone was clutching their pearls at this time, and and it just seemed so anathema that our political leaders would ever do these things. All the while, of course, we've known from JFK on, like these were the affairs and issues that were happening. They were happening. We just didn't have the deepened awareness. And then I do think with the advent of the internet and the 24-hour news cycle, it just became easier and easier for us to be privy to these issues that were happening. And then I also think it led to a sort of a jadedness in society, where once we begin to know, we begin to care less and less over time. Things that were big issues in the moment became less so over the years and then the decades and the generations, I guess. Yeah.
That's a good word. I think you're spot on with that. So you mentioned Monica. We're not going to go straight into the scandal yet.
Mm.
Doing some digging on that. Their relationship did start while you were there. So it started in 95, and everything, I think, really came out in 97, 98. So a couple years after the fact is when everything started to really break. But that being said, let's just focus in, if you can, just for a little bit about Monica as the person, as your fellow intern. Any memories of her? Any experiences that you had with Monica that you can share?
Only one, and it was a positive one. It was kind of, I think, it was funny when we did our intern photo with all of us together. They dragged us out to the Rose Gardeners. I forget exactly where we were, but they had us positioned outside, waiting for the president to come and take this photo with us. And we presumed that it was going to be 10-15 minute wait outside for him to join. Brad, we were out there for like 2 hours waiting for the president to come. I don't know what.
And we're talking like DC in August, hot, humid, painful.
And I'm sitting there in my blue blazer, tie, my shirt buttoned up all the way to the top, and I've always been a prolific sweater. I mean, I sweat all the time. I'm even like sweating right now. But DC humidity and heat. Woo! It was incredibly hot, and I had this like light blue shirt on with my yellow and blue striped tie, very conservative looking. And man, I sweat through that entire thing. My suit jacket was soaked. And what I remember, Monica was standing next to me. We were organized in alphabetical order, and she was so kind. So I remember she had like a little piece of tissue, and she was using it to dab herself. And she's like, "Do you want this?" And I thought to myself, "No, I don't really want your sweaty tissue, but I appreciate, you're noticing that I'm suffering here in the heat. Thank you for your kindness." And so we all suffered together. We finally were able to take the picture. I remember going back into the old executive office building and just kind of cooling out for whatever remaining hours we had for the day, trying to regain consciousness from, being out for so long. And that was one of those experiences where it was like, we got to be with the president, but he was so far away from the majority of us. It didn't really feel like we were with him, you know. But that picture became famous. That picture that we took was one that they actually published in, I think it was Time Magazine or Newsweek when the whole scandal broke. And my claim to fame was that when they highlight the picture of Monica Lewinsky in that big photo, I'm the guy right next to her in like the dark, you know, portion. Her face is being highlighted. I'm the guy next to her, you know, kind of looking innocuous, you know, just off to the side.
Why were you next to Odoi? Is it just like it was an alphabetical thing that they're just kind of like throwing you guys in that way?
Alphabetical, yeah. So Odotei, Lewinsky, somehow I guess there weren't any other, you know, M's or N's or whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, I was right there. And man, it was crazy. When that story broke,
So did you know?
it,
So this is your interaction with Monica. She's kind. She's thoughtful. She sees that there's this great guy that is sweating profusely. She's trying to help the best she can. But I'm assuming you probably knew of her, even if you hadn't interacted with her at that point. Was she someone that was known amongst the interns? Was she pretty popular amongst the interns? I'm assuming you and everybody else, just to be in that position, you guys are the elite, right? You guys are charismatic, you guys are interesting personalities. So did you know that she existed before you spent that time with her? And what did the interns think of her?
yeah, I didn't know her very well. I remember that she seemed pretty gregarious and outgoing, even more so than, you know, all of us were achievers and were trying to move up the ladders of success. And she stood out as sort of someone at the acme of all of that. If memory serves, I think she did invite me out once for like intern drinks or something social. But like I said, because I was living outside the city and had a very strict schedule, I wasn't able to attend. But I did appreciate the gesture and her being, you know, kind of inviting me and including me in what was going on. And so that did make an impression on me. I thought, oh, you know, she was a, you know, attractive young woman. You know, I thought she was pretty, and I was like, oh, this is, you know, she seemed pretty cool. And yeah, I just remember of all the group, like, you know, there are 50, 60 of us, I forget exactly the number, but she did make an impression on me. So yeah.
So if you could go back and I mean, here's the reality, Odoi. You had no clue that you were a part of a very historical moment in history. You're just thinking, I mean, there's been thousands of interns before you. There's been thousands of interns after you, and it doesn't make the news. It goes on without a hitch, and we know that there's interns, but we just don't really think much of it, right? In hindsight, do you think you would have gotten to know those interns a little bit better, a little bit more, just because, you know, the interns, you guys were really a part of the history. You were an integral part of that time in American history, really.
Yeah. You asked earlier if I were given the opportunity to support a niece or nephew or someone else, would I do that? Yes, I would give them the financial support if I had the means to support them in that. But I think I would have also advised I would also advise a young person, like, spend time, get to know your peers. You know, if you're living you know, an hour outside, you know, like, find it 1 or 2 times a week to at least stay a little longer and have those social moments where you get to process, like, what's happening in the office. I don't remember feeling like I was processing the moment to the degree that I probably should have. And I wish I could have had that benefit of, like, just being able to have, you know, more deep, enriching conversations about what was happening at the time. Everything felt very, uh, yeah, like we're really keeping to a very structured schedule on what we had to do. And while there are benefits to that, and I definitely feel like we were doing important work, as I said, creating communication reports that would go up to the president. And I would remember hearing him, like, he would be on the nightly news, and I would hear the president actually refer to topics and issues that people were addressing. I feel like, wow, this is making a difference. I do wish that we'd had more time just to kind of, I'd had more time to just kick back enjoy the moment, be more reflective. Now I'm doing it 30 years later, and I'm like, well, it would have been cool at age 19 to be able to do that too, to a greater degree.
For sure. Yeah, that's good. So, a couple years after you were an intern, everything starts to break out, and you're seeing your old boss in a roundabout way. Clinton was your boss in a roundabout way. You're seeing one of your fellow interns just in the news. And we're not going to really focus in on all of the details and history of that, because if anyone wants to find out about that scandal, they can easily go anywhere to find out about that. But I want to hear your perspective and your thoughts on it. So this is you're 2 years, maybe 3 years older. You're probably finishing up Harvard. What was your initial reaction when you heard about, hey, this fellow intern that I actually know and my old boss, there's this big scandal around them. What was your initial reaction when you heard all of that, Odoi?
Yeah. So true story. Actually, I ended up dropping out of Harvard to go and work in the film industry in the late 90s. And when this whole story broke, I was working for New Line Cinema.
Did you drop out because you're like, hey, Bill Gates dropped out, Zuckerberg drops out? I mean, I know he's post you, but there's a lot of famous guys from Harvard that drop out and do amazing stuff.
Yeah, that was part of my story. Yeah, for sure. I remember I became so enamored with the film industry because they actually shot the film Good Will Hunting with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck.
Great film.
Yeah, beautiful film right outside my dormitory room. I remember I was sleeping in my Harvard dorm.
That was like 96, 97. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. I was in my dorm, and what I remember, I was napping in my dorm room, and these huge floodlights were coming through, and it woke me up. The light was so bright. I'm like, what is going on? And looked outside my window. They were shooting that famous scene from Good Will Hunting where Matt Damon says, "How do you like them apples?" Like literally like feet from where I was sleeping.
And he pushes the number up against the glass, right?
Exactly. I mean, all that restaurant, everything that was right there. Those were real physical locations. And I remember going out to the street and seeing what was going on. And, at the time, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, they weren't names. Like they weren't, the big star of the movie was Robin Williams. He was.
Robin Williams, yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe Minnie Driver, maybe a bit.
She was probably a little more famous than, but like not very much. I mean,
and Matt Damon, he's a fellow Harvard guy. Is that right? Isn't that right?
And he also dropped out too. Yeah. And so I remember just being amazed at, the size of the production and what was going on. I was so fascinated. So I ended up leaving Harvard to go and pursue a career in Hollywood, and was really fortunate. I left within a week of arriving in Los Angeles, was able to get a job, a temporary position, but a job nonetheless with New Line Cinema, working in physical production. I was the administrative assistant to the head of production, who actually went on to be the associate producer of the Lord of the Rings films. And it was a really cool, I don't know how these opportunities befell me, but they did. And
Odoi, did you ever was there like a hint or an opportunity? Because this is around the same time they're starting to shoot those films over in New Zealand. So was there did you hear about rumblings of a possibility of being able to head over to New Zealand?
I even tried to head over to New Zealand, but at the time, to get the work permit to be there, you had to really be skilled labor. And I wasn't. If I was someone working with the, film union and doing something that required a technical role, I probably would have been permitted to go. But because I wasn't, it was very hard to get the permission, the permit to go. So my boss did. She frequently was there. She was the associate producer. She was on the ground quite a bit, working with Peter Jackson and the whole crew. I stayed behind in LA, and my focal role was kind of organizing production notes and content that Peter Jackson and the other creatives were putting together to make the movies. And that was an honor too, in and of itself. This is, once again, this is way before the advent of digital technology. So everything was being done by hand. And Brad, I remember I put together like a whole wall of D-ring binders with front and back laminated pages of hand-drawn pictures that Peter Jackson had done of like hobbits' feet and like and pictures of Gollum and prosthetic ears that would be on elves that they were testing, like all the testing content that was being physically shot and put on, actual photographs I would organize for the production. And I was amazed by it. Like I was blown away by the amount of intentionality that was brought into that content development. And
There's
yeah, I
something
remember,
there's
yeah,
something beautiful about all of that labor and all of that thoughtfulness that you had to sift through in order to get that archive put together, because now it's just so easy, right? And it's so simple, and you guys had to get to a final outcome that is still standing the test of time. My wife and I, we watched the trilogy. We usually watch it when it's cold outside. It's a good movie to watch when it's cold. So we watched it over winter this year. We watched the extended version. So it was like 12 hours, and it took us 6 nights to do it. But you put a lot of like analog effort into something that is going to be around for, thousands of years, but I think people will probably be enjoying it for the next 50 to 100.
yeah, it was amazing. And it wasn't a given that those films were going to be a success. It was really, you have to go back to that period of time. The amount of money that New Line Cinema, where I worked, was bankrolling to make the films was astronomical. I mean, I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $250 million or something, which is, the new Mission Impossible movie that's coming out right now probably costs $250 million
If
alone to
not,
make,
if not more,
if not more. But back then it was like, this is an astronomical amount of money. And I remember the execs of my company coming to all of us, and they literally said, not trying to mince words, they said, if these films fail, we're all out of a job. Like, it's like, you can just say goodbye.
There's some beauty in taking all your chips and just throwing them in like that, though.
Oh yeah, there really was. And I remember I hadn't read the Tolkien books. I knew of the stories. I knew that they were important literature, but I didn't really know how beautiful and vivid they were. I've since read them, and it's been amazing what Jackson was able to accomplish with the visual medium and film, and to bring all of that about. And it was such a massive undertaking, all hands on deck. Everybody was doing everything that we could from where we stood in our roles to make the films a success. And so I did my bit, organizing the content. And it was really, for a fanboy like me, I was like, this is great fun. Like, you're looking at all this nerdy, in-depth content development and putting it together and organizing it. And so I had a blast. That was huge. But I will say it was also the reason why it was part of the reason why I ultimately left the film industry, because I realized, wow, we are spending so much money, so much energy on something that is important, but there are more important things in the world to invest resources and money and energy towards. And I thought to myself, if I could give, the amount of energy that I'm investing here into something bigger than myself and bigger than just entertainment, how could what change could that bring about in this world? And I felt like I owed it to not only to myself, but I owed it to the world to deepen my investments beyond just, what's kind of giving me the visceral feels. Like, I don't want to diminish the importance of art. I think it's important for us to experience it. It helps us evaluate and understand ourselves and the world around us, and that's important. But when I began realizing, all these things, they all kind of enmesh and they're all connected. Being in DC, being in and working in the federal government, seeing that these issues are important and that there needs to be change brought about, seeing the power plays involved, the amount of money involved, I realized that there was, I wanted to work somewhere in the nexus of all of that. Where can we bring about the most good, utilizing the resources that we have to support the needs of those who are vulnerable? And that, that ultimately led to, you know, where God has led me now to the work that I do now. So it was all long and winding road to where God has brought me. So,
Odoi, our journeys in hindsight seem so clear and simple, but when we're in the middle of them, they can be a bit of a head scratcher. But it sounds like a lot of that was needed to get you to where you're at today.
amen. It was really good. And I don't regret any of it. Yeah, it was also necessary. But New Line, working at New Line, I was at New Line Cinema for 4 years, and such a blessed and really interesting time. It was, yeah, New Line in that period. Take a step back, like before the Lord of the Rings films, the biggest thing that New Line was known for were like the Nightmare on Elm Street films and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies. Like it's so like it was. I remember we all thought of ourselves as sort of like we called ourselves the goat. We made goat movies, meaning not like greatest of all time, but like the bad movies that made money, like that. And so it wasn't until the Lord of the Rings films came out that I think New Line really got on the map as being, wow, these guys are making some quality pictures.
Did they do anything after Lord of the Rings that was significant like that?
Oh yeah, I remember New Line ended up merging with a Warner Brothers, and
Okay.
there've been other hits. Honestly, I haven't tracked as closely. I've been out of the industry for, gosh, 20 plus years. So, but yeah, I'm sure there've been there were other hits. I remember working on a lot of bad movies at the time. So Austin Powers. That was like, remember Austin Powers? Those were big
Of
hits.
course.
Yeah,
Of course. That's New Line as well?
that was New Line as well. So
Yeah.
those were
Now, I mean,
huge.
there's films like I don't know if you know this about Austin Powers, but that's a great film. There's a handful of films. So, Shawshank Redemption, horrible in the box office.
Yeah.
Big Lebowski, horrible in the box office. Austin Powers, horrible in the box office, but massive appeal once it went to video. So,
Yeah,
that was one
the
of
first
those.
movie was bad. I think the second one skyrocketed. It did much
Yeah,
better in the
yeah,
box
because I
office.
mean, it was a part of the zeitgeist at that point. That's right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
So
Okay, so getting back to why we're here,
yeah,
you're at New Line, and something's hitting the headlines, and it's your former fellow intern and your former boss, and a lot of crazy scandal. What was it? How did you feel, Odoi? What was it like?
yeah, man, it was crazy. I remember I was working at New Line, and it wasn't unusual for me to work late into the evening. I At the time, the New Line's offices were in Hollywood, and I was living in the Venice Beach area, which was 45 minutes, an hour away from my office. But I didn't have a car at the time, Brett. I had to take the bus, like, from Venice. I was broke, and like I was, young, 20 something. And
Odoi,
so I'd work.
it seems like horrible commuting is kind of like your thing.
Yeah, it really was for a long time. I didn't get my first car until after I'd worked at New Line for several months and was able to save some money to get a Honda Civic. I remember I was like so excited. I got a brand new Honda Civic.
Great first car.
Oh yeah, it was wonderful. But yeah, so I was working late nights at New Line, and this will also date myself in that period. Like this was back when they had those huge box TVs that they would put in these sort of metal mounting structures, like in the corners of offices, so you could watch the news and things of that nature. And that's what I remember sitting at my desk, probably 7 p.m. at night. I'd stepped out to go get a Philly cheesesteak or something to eat, and came back, was, plowing through Peter Jackson photos or whatever it was I was looking at. And I'm eating my cheesesteak, and I'm watching this big box TV in the corner of my office, and Monica Lewinsky's face pops on the screen. And it was weird. I'm looking, I was like, I know that person, but I couldn't place it. I was like, where do I know her from? And then there was like a chyron across the bottom of the screen that said, "Oh, White House intern has an affair with president." And oh my goodness, my eyes became. I was like, "What? No!" I couldn't believe it. I was blown away, and I feel like this probably didn't happen, but I feel like at that time, moments later, after I see this news story break, the phone on my desk begins ringing. And I did at some point receive a call from ABC News, Nightline, because they'd somehow tracked me down and the other interns, and they wanted us all, they were trying to reach out to see if we'd be willing to come and do exactly what we're doing now, like recount what we knew of the story. And I remember I took the call from Nightline and I told them, look, I don't know her very well. I'd be very remiss to try to come on your show and try to make up some scintillating story that you'd want to use. And so I did pass on it. But I remember seeing
Did you think about the sweating incident and think maybe this is CNN gold right now?
No, I thought like I could get on there and just embarrass myself and embarrass her with like something so lame. But
Odoi,
yeah.
how long was it before you saw yourself? Because I mean, you said that you are a part of that famous intern photo. How long did you think in your head, like, this is the girl I was standing next to in the intern photo? And did you start thinking in your mind, like, I'm going to show up in the news at some point?
Oh yeah, it happened almost immediately. If it wasn't that first day that they actually showed the actual photo, and once again, I'm in like the blackened portion, and was they're highlighting her face, it happened almost immediately, and it happened multiple times. I remember, and my mother still to this day has the Time magazine of where the photo was taken. She has the original of the photo too, somewhere like probably her sock drawer or something. But like it was all happening right then and there. And, man, it was a whirlwind. You go from just being a part of the tapestry of this to being, front and center in the story. And like I said, I didn't know her very well, so I didn't feel like I had much to draw from. But I did feel like I remember feeling like, oh, this is big. And for the last 30 years, when people bring up that scandal and what took place, I'm always able to say, yeah, I was I was there. I was part of that moment at the very least. And so it is a claim to fame, so to speak. So
Was it hard for you, or was it easy for you? Like, you're going through this, it's late at night, you're by yourself, you're looking at Hobbit feet, but you're going to see your colleagues, you're going to see your fellow New Line staff the next day. Are you thinking in your mind, like, I'm just going to hold this inside and I'm not going to share this with anybody else because I'm going to be known throughout this entire place as the fellow Monica Lewinsky intern if I say a single word? Or did you just let people know? What did you do?
oh,
How did you respond?
I let people know. I was kind of proud of it, like sort of thinking, oh, this is, you have to realize where I was. I'm working in Hollywood, and this is a place where celebrity and fame is celebrated. And this was, you know, this whole scandal was breaking, but it was a moment of celebrity, so to speak. Now, sadly, Monica was made she was in the crosshairs, and the aspersions were cast upon her, which I think now in hindsight, people realize that was the wrong thing to do. But it was a very big story, and it was a very popular story. And I remember I didn't shy away from it. I wasn't ashamed of it. I was more proud that I could say I was an intern at the White House, and I was somehow there in this moment, even if I wasn't involved myself. I was in the room, when all this was going down. So yeah, I found it to be really fascinating, and actually kind of was a feather in my bonnet when I came to all of my colleagues. That whole season of life, Brad, was fascinating because I was meeting celebrities, I was meeting people like Peter Jackson and Elijah Wood, and all the hobbits were like were roaming the offices when they were in the States. And you have to realize this is back before they were famous. Like,
Did you meet Sean Astin?
met Sean Astin. They all came in at one point. I remember thinking like, this is really cool. But
Am
they
I
weren't.
wrong? Am I wrong in thinking that maybe Sean Astin and Sam he's
Yeah.
kind of like the hero of the whole movie, kind of?
No, he is. He is. And Sean Astin was a hero of mine as a kid growing up because you might recall he was in the Goonies, and he was like
Mikey.
Yeah, he was the head of the Goonies and like, or the unofficial leader. And that was a huge movie of my adolescence. And so he was probably the biggest star amongst those guys at the time. And then of course they all became, you know,
Massive.
massive. And that was a huge change. So yeah, Peter Jackson, the Hobbits.
Totally off subject, Odoi.
Yeah.
Thoughts on Goonies 2? They've announced it. I don't know if they're going to be shooting it in Astoria, Oregon again, but they might. Thoughts on pulling that cast together? Sean Astin, what do you think?
I don't know, man. I don't think we have to go back there. If they had a really original story with a whole new generation of young people, maybe, but I don't feel the need to go back. I mean, these guys, they're older than I am even. They're probably pushing 60 now. It's like, do we really need to see these guys back in the place? Yeah, Josh Brolin. Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
It sure took a long time. I mean, that film came out in 85. So we're talking 40 years later at the earliest that they're going to have a sequel to The Goonies. My wife, I would say she's very cultured. She's European and she's got great taste. She's a wonderful violinist, but her favorite film of all time is The Goonies.
Really? Wow.
That's her favorite. Number one.
No offense, but like, I don't feel like it held up as much as I remember loving it as a kid. It was it was fun because the kids are in control and they're taking control of the situation. It doesn't stand out as much to me as like other hits of that period, like Back to the Future. I remember when I showed my son Back to the Future, he was like, he got it immediately. And he was like,
that's probably the best movie ever made. That one's incredible. It's incredible.
It really is. It's just like,
Odoi, you mentioned Alex B. Keaton. Now you mentioned Marty McFly. You're just nailing all of Michael J. Fox's key characters.
Yeah. The alchemy of that time, because when you think about it, like, why did this stuff hit? Because, John Mulaney does that famous comedy bit where he's trying to explain, like, Back to the Future, and the whole premise sounds so insane, guy goes back in time and he's hit on by his mother. And it's like, it's like, who would have ever thought, like, this would be a cultural touchstone? And really, that
a lot of studio houses passed on Back to the Future for the very reason you just mentioned. Like they brought it to Disney and Disney said like, we can't have this incestuous stuff on a part of our name. So they passed on it. Another interesting fact too, Odoi, is that Steven Spielberg, executive producer for both The Goonies and Back to the Future, and some super fans have looked into it and people believe that those two films happened within their canon at the exact same time.
I love how they do these, how they connect those stories and these different mythologies together. I don't believe that that's true, that they actually were concurrent, but man, they were at the moment so groundbreaking. I remember seeing, I can remember seeing Back to the Future. We saw it in a drive-in movie theater, and the next day I was like, I've got to get a skateboard. I've got to be Marty McFly. Like,
I will be Marty McFly.
He is so cool. It's just like this guy. And it just shows the charisma of Michael J. Fox. He was a one of a kind. Like, he was such an amazing actor. He was able to make Alex P. Keaton, this conservative, Nixon loving guy, even seem cool at the time. So, yeah.
But see, Odoi, that's Hollywood for you, because I feel like Michael J. Fox is the most Americana guy ever, and he's from British Columbia. So there you go.
He just has that thing, I loved him. Everybody loved him. He was huge. It was like he was the guy. He was the guy.
Yeah. So all this stuff starts breaking, Odoi. You're in the middle of it. You're in Hollywood. It's pretty interesting. I mean, goodness, as a small talk party favor at a party, it's something you can just talk to anyone about. They're super interested. But you're now starting to like reflect on your time back in DC. That was a couple years before. Lots of things were going on that you didn't know about, thank goodness. And how did that scandal really alter your perception of power and leadership in Washington? You know, you already said earlier on in the show, you said that you found out folks were really a lot more selfish than you would have hoped. It would have been, service over self, not really happening. How did that scandal alter, like, okay, my worldview is kind of shifting now because of what was really happening?
Well, it made me realize early on, and this is, it probably seems old hat to many, but at that point in my life, I realized you can be someone as great of a leader as Bill Clinton was and is, but you make these moral missteps, and it brings the whole house of cards down so quickly and easily. I think I realized that having integrity and the moral fortitude that's needed to lead is so important. It's not simply about the policies you enacted and the changes you brought about, but who you are as a person and how you treated others and how you respected the power that was given to you was so important. And that was a lesson I learned early on. Have I made mistakes myself? Of course, many. There are things that I'm not ashamed of, that I'm ashamed of, certainly. But I think in hindsight, I can look back and see how leaders like Clinton totally damaged their legacy because of these things that they felt were probably innocuous and small, but actually were defining for them. And so now in hindsight, you just think you see so many people, the Me Too movement and things that came to the fore for around celebrities who were revered, and you realized because they took advantage and sexually abused, it just totally besmirched their entire careers, and many of them are no longer they're not part of the zeitgeist any longer because of what took place. So it was a lesson for me that I realized we have to, you can do amazing things, but if you allow your moral foundation to slip, you can lose it all just like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, he started out in, I believe, Hope, Arkansas, governor of Arkansas. Let's remember, you said earlier on that he was super charismatic, that he had a sincere interest in people. He remembered you. He remembered your name. He remembered the reference to you. This was a guy, let's put all politics aside, pretty good guy, pretty thoughtful person, really great communicator, really clear leader. And he had made so many great decisions over decades. And it was one decision that we know about that, or a series of decisions that we know about that are affiliated with Monica, that has really tainted people's perspective of him as a leader, when there was a lot of really great things about this guy as president.
Yeah. I mean, he's remarkable. You don't become president without having some degree of charisma and a power. It does take a lot to rise to that level. And I think Clinton certainly was among the greats in that regard. But I also think when you are that gifted and it can be a slippery slope where your ego takes over. Now, I don't want to presume to understand or do a psychological diagnosis of this person. I'm not qualified to do that for Bill Clinton, but I know a little bit of what it's like to have strengths and how easy it can become to allow those to make you feel that you're above and above others, and how quickly you can be humbled in that regard. And I'm sure with Bill Clinton, he was intellectually astute. He was charismatic. He was able to work across the aisle and negotiate and bring together people of disparate views. I'm sure he thought of himself, and probably still thinks of himself, as an amazing networker and someone that can, and a leader of the free world, which he was. But then you look back on the many charges of sexual harassment and affairs that he had. It darkens his whole biography, sadly. And
It's interesting though,
yeah,
Odoi, because you mentioned like with the advent of the internet or, the digital age, things are just so much more clear. I think that we now know in hindsight that John F. Kennedy, for example, really sorted past as well, but folks just it didn't come into light. Folks didn't know much about it. And so I think humanity is humanity. I remember talking to my wife once and saying like, "Hey, I wonder if like, is society getting worse and worse and more depraved?" And she said, I'm pretty sure London was the same as it was 100 years ago as it is today. We're just a lot more clear about what we can see and what we know about it. And I think there's probably some truth to that.
yeah, we're far more aware, and it's easier for us to see and hear these things, and also to our detriment. Like, things are manipulated in media too today. Like, probably we have to really weigh everything with a grain of salt. What is true, what is not, because of how quickly we can receive information. That's why, these accusations of fake news and things of the nature, while I don't believe those are all true, I do think there is a greater degree of mixed media messages coming across because of the speed of accessibility, because of the appetite of people to consume content. They want more and more material of, puerile nature. We just want to know more and more, and sometimes our ability uh, to determine what is right and true and necessary is lessened because of our consuming appetite around that
Right.
material. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Adoy, what do you think about like, I know for me, when this all came out, like these types of stories are a part of humanity for thousands and thousands of years. And I remember as a young person, the thing that I probably struggled with the most was if you remember when Bill Clinton went on television, stared directly down the barrel of the camera, and he essentially lied to the American public and denied that it had happened with as much reverence and sincerity as he possibly could. And it was pretty compelling that, hey, this didn't happen. These are all lies that folks are using to kind of get to him.
Mm,
And when he decided like I can't backtrack from this, I have to own this, I have to admit this. For me specifically, I went back to that time when he lied to me. He lied to me. He lied to you. He lied to all of us. And I just thought to myself, this hurts more than what he even did. It hurt that he would do something like that to us and just lie openly like that. How did that did that affect you in a similar way, or do you remember that happening? Do you have any reflections on that moment in history?
yeah, I think, and I'm sure we've all experienced this. There can come a point where if you tell a lie often enough, it becomes your truth.
Right.
And my assumption with President Clinton at that time was that he felt in his heart that that was his truth, even though it was totally false and wrong.
Right.
And I think a lot of leaders today have succumbed to this idea that if you continually tell a lie enough, and you're bold enough to repeat it over and over again, it can become reality. And sadly, in politics, that is becoming more and more the case. I I don't want to play partisan politics, but I do. I remember when Donald Trump debated Joe Biden, they noted that Donald Trump lied over 30 times. Joe Biden lied or mishandled the truth 9 times in what he was saying. And I think with leaders, there is a propensity to get to this place where if you shape your narrative in such a way that you believe it, then it becomes your truth. But I do think it's incredibly dangerous for us. Clinton did have an affair with that girl, that young woman.
Yeah, that's right.
She wasn't fully mature. Her frontal lobe had not fully developed.
Well, I mean,
he took,
let's be honest. I mean, he's
yeah,
in a position of power, the greatest seat, period, and she's an intern that's unpaid. That is inexcusable. I mean, and he's married. It's all
yeah,
inexcusable.
it is. It's really so, so sad. And to make matters worse, she was painted to be like this, like she was the one manipulating the situation and trying to
Right.
leverage it for her own benefit. And so it's sad. And I do think he probably got there and began speaking up and believing his own falsehood to be true. And I think it was a turning point for the American public, because I think we've allowed in our minds this idea that if you say something often enough and passionately enough, then it will become true. And it's not the case. I think
Hmm.
it's created a, a US populace where critical thinking and looking at something squarely and being able to say, no, this is not right, or this is not true, has become problematic for us. And we're unable to do it in many ways. And that's sad. That's really, really sad, because there is truth. There is falsehood. And if we can't actually claim those things and honestly embrace them for what they are, it's to our detriment, and it'll hurt our society. It has hurt our society, and will
Yeah,
continue to do so.
and it hurts us too. I mean, the truth
Yeah,
hurts,
yeah,
but you have to go through reality to get to where you need to go.
yeah. We knew the truth. Mm.
So, along those terms of truth, how about the American people? Do you think that there's anything that they misunderstood about what happened during the scandal? Was there anything that you feel was maybe misrepresented? I mean, you did mention that clearly Monica Lewinsky was victimized and the victim in this, and they turned her into a bit of an evil mistress, I guess, but she's an intern. Is there anything else that you think that the population just misunderstood about what was happening throughout this based off of your experience in the White House?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I do think she was victimized in this situation. I I don't I don't claim to know exactly what her accessibility was to the president at the time, but if her experience was anything like my own, it was very limited. And if she was brought into his inner circle at any point, it was because he wanted that.
Right.
We weren't, it wasn't as, we weren't in a position where we could fraternize with the president or any of the people that are closest to him without him opening that door. And so if she was able to gain that access, is because he welcomed it and wanted it to be that case. And I think it's so sad that she has become she was for so many years this public pariah. I know she struggled with trying to find work and respectability and even develop relationships because of that. And I'm sure it's still a part of her identity, and the trauma that came from it still is impacting her to this day.
I mean,
Uh,
it's not fair, Odoi, but she's to some degree a caricature.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's not fair. This was a very brief moment of her life, and this was hoisted on her.
yeah.
Did she participate? Absolutely, but in a way that was incredibly one-sided in my mind.
For sure, for sure. And that's so sad, because she is an incredibly capable human being. If I can say anything about the interns that I was surrounded with, they were amazingly gifted intellectually and had strengths that were a benefit to the U.S. government. You know, we were serving and supporting the work of the government, even in our low-level capacity as interns, and that's a good thing. And Monica was certainly a part of that. And to think that she was painted into this corner as being a harlot or someone that she truly wasn't. She was a victim. She was a victim, and that's sad. And I think we've you know I think now she's becoming out and people are realizing the value that she can bring to these situations. I know she's spoken out against bullying and around, the victimization of people in these situations. And that's great. And I'm glad that she's been able to have a voice around that. I would just say it was certainly a sad time in our country where we were able to paint this young person as being the uh, the one that what's the word I'm looking for? Like that manipulated the moment. That
Right.
that wasn't her. That was something that she was.
I mean,
We're sitting.
frankly, it could have been, I'm not saying it was, but it could have been spun from the Clinton administration. I'm not saying it was.
Mhm.
Or, frankly, this is a free market capitalistic country and it sells soap, right?
It
And the
does.
idea is I want to sell as much soap as possible. And so if I can make this as steamy and controversial as possible, I'm going to sell a lot more soap.
Yeah. And I think that's sad. I think journalism has gotten to a place where we are trying to sell so much and trying to get as many views, as many click-throughs as we can possibly get. And this was a tipping point in the country that showed that, well, if we go in this direction, it can help us get greater ratings. It can help us, bring a scintillating story to the top of the media pile and get attention. But at what cost? At what cost to us as a people? And now I see us with the advent of TikTok and Instagram, like these quick media bites, be they true or false, as long as they're scintillating and they grab your attention, that's all that counts. And I think the Monica Lewinsky story was in was a tipping point, an acme moment that led us to this place that we're in now, where we're always inundated with this sort of information. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we going to be discerning? Are we going to be critical thinkers that can determine truth from falsehood? And what does that mean for us? Are we able to provide the proper analytical lens to these things so we can discern the right from wrong and what we should be focusing in on?
To some degree, though, Odoi, I feel like folks can do it as long as it benefits them. And what I mean by that is if there is a blatant truth that is upsetting for someone's personal camp, easily blind eye to it, right? But if there is something that is a big splinter in their opposing candidate or opposing view, it's like it's brought up and it's true and it's here and look at this, right? And so I feel like everyone really deserves to be treated the same in as much as, hey, we just got to deal with facts as they are rather than I'm going to keep really quiet if it doesn't help me in my cause and I'm going to make a ton of noise if it does, right? And so I think that's something that we're seeing a lot. So much controversy happening around political figures and one side's making a ton of noise and the other isn't, and then just reverse it for the other side. There's, all the controversy around, did people prop up Biden when he shouldn't have been? Did they know a lot about his condition when they shouldn't have? And then, of course, all of the sordid facts about Trump and things that he's actually had to go on to trial and been convicted of. And one side wants to talk about it, the other side doesn't, and vice versa. So I feel like everyone's to blame to some degree.
Yeah. And I do think out of all of the chaos, opportunity raises its head. I think what I'm realizing is that because it's happening on both sides and we can see the cracks in the armor of these bastions of importance in the public eye, we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, what can we do to avoid these sort of challenges in the future?
Yes.
And my hope would be that we would really want to take an unbiased, nonpartisan view and say, some of these things are just not right. And this is where we as a country need to evaluate and come to a place where we're able to understand that. I think back to like the civil rights movement in the United States and the position that Dr. Martin Luther King had. He wasn't a perfect individual. He had his own failings,
As we all
do. But when I think about him, I think here is someone who was able to look and take a step back and find a common perspective, or at least a perspective that we now view as common, that informed the way that we now function as a society. It wasn't popular at the moment, but he was able to create a space for public discourse that led us to a future in this country that, albeit not perfect, was better than where we were in the past. And he was able to speak up in that moment and honestly address what we needed to be thinking about as a country. I'm hopeful that out of all of this public morass and all these issues, we'll get to a similar place where there will be voices that will stand up and say, wait a second, let's take a step back. Let's analyze where we are. And what does this mean for us as a people? I'm not speaking as a Democrat. I'm not speaking as a Republican. I'm speaking as a citizen of this nation that cares about where we are. Can we, as a people, come to a common ground understanding of what will be beneficial for us all, for our thriving, for our flourishing, for our mutual change and transformation? And I feel hopeful that we'll get to that point because we need it. There's a hunger for it. We can only gravitate between the poles for so long before we come to a place in the middle where we realize this is what we need to be unified, to go forward as a nation, that deserves our investment and appreciation, that so we can maintain the union. So yeah, I'm hopeful in the midst of all of this that we'll learn from the experiences of our past. We'll learn from the Lewinsky scandal. We'll learn from the scandals that followed that, and realize we need to grow from it and not repeat it. Yeah.
It's good. Odoi, I'm going to do some quick firing of some pretty fun, interesting questions as we end our time together. I think you're going to like a lot of these. Okay, so this is some fun stuff, right? What's the strangest, Odoi, or the most unexpected moment you experienced at the White House? What was the weirdest thing that happened?
So one day we would get gifts all the time from supporters and people that just wanted to send things to the president. And one time I remember we received a box of chocolates that were from some supporter in Kentucky, and they were chocolates, but each one of the chocolates was filled with Kentucky bourbon. Like it was just, and I remember,
was it still retaining its alcohol at that point?
It did. They were potent. And I remember we interns, we all had several of them, and we felt the buzz from the alcohol in the chocolates. And then someone, I think it must have been our supervisor, went out and bought beers for us too. And like, I remember being in the old executive office building, eating these Kentucky bourbon chocolates and drinking beer at the White House, underage, not supposed to be doing this.
Did they say anything that to you about like, hey, this is technically not legal, but have a cold one on me, or like what did they say?
That's exactly what they said. They sort of like said that, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be doing this with you. But hey, we're gonna turn a blind eye to it. I'm sure there's some video. Even back then, they had video cameras. I'm sure. So I'm sure there's some documentation of beers being smuggled into the old executive office building. And now in hindsight, that seems so innocuous and so small. But it was fun. It was a fun experience, and we felt like we were being bad.
Well, you guys are having fun as 19-year-olds. Okay, so how about this? Along those lines, and remember, Odoi, the statute of limitations is over, so
Yeah.
you're not going to get in trouble with this one. Did you ever take any memorabilia from your internship? Did you grab anything on the way out, either officially or unofficially?
Oh yeah, definitely. I remember I grabbed White House letterhead, and I did receive a recommendation letter. It was from, I forget, I think it was from the president or something. But I remember I copied that bad boy over and over again on White House,
That's
and I
right.
used it for like every first job that I applied for. So that I remember taking that, and I remember they either gave us or I probably stole a bunch of these too. Like there were uh, White House M&Ms that they were like, yeah, a special box of M&Ms that had the White House insignia on them, and I got several of those boxes, and I gave them out to friends, and so yeah, White House letterhead. I'm I'm sure if I went back and I looked in some old boxes of mine, I'm sure there would be still remnants of that somewhere. And M&Ms were my claim to fame. I loved getting all of those. Yeah.
Ever ever thought about like taking a glass that the president had used, or maybe something weird like a tissue, anything strange like that? I mean, I know that's kind of creepy.
No, I don't remember getting any of that sort of thing. I will say one of the biggest memories I remember getting into the White House early. Like I said, I did these early commutes, and occasionally I would get there early in the morning before my 8 a.m. start time in the office. And I went into the cafeteria in the old executive office building. And man, the food there was amazing.
It
I
was
remember
great.
it was like I remember having corned beef hash there that was so tasty. I would like, indulge whenever I got there and really enjoyed the food in the cafeteria. It was really whoever cooked was putting their heart into it. So
I mean, DC makes sense from a geographical perspective because it, of course, can easily represent both the South and the North where it's sitting. So, was there Southern food there as well that people could choose from?
yeah, I mean, I remember the hash. I'm sure there were all sorts of dishes, but just the
Grits,
overall quality. I remember,
grits
yeah,
if you want it.
yeah, grits, and the quality was great. And I remember thinking, man, this is like I love eating here. I remember having rice and gravy and steak and gravy at one point, and was like, wow, this is so tasty.
Did they make you pay for it, or was it more like a free for all when you got in there?
I can't recall. I think we probably did have to pay for it, but it wasn't. It didn't break the bank. So let's say that much. Yeah.
Well, what would you say was the best perk of being a White House intern? I mean, they're not paying you, and so I know that we always kind of feel for our interns when we're not paying for them. Was there a perk that they gave you?
Yeah, the memory of being able to rub shoulders with the president, the vice president, with their cabinet members, their leaders. I mean, it was powerful. Like I said, I got to go to the president's birthday party and see George Stephanopoulos and Janet Reno and Jimmy Buffett and you're 19 years old and you're seeing all these celebrities, people that you only see on TV. They're memories that I'll remember forever.
And it
So
probably to some degree like prepared you for new line because you'd see all these famous folks, and so by the time you were seeing these Hollywood types, you're like, I can handle this.
exactly. That's why so many people in the federal government were angling to get out and go work in Hollywood because they were already hobnobbing with the celebrities anyway. I'm sure it's even more like that today with the Trump administration and his proximity to celebrities. So yeah, it was an easy on ramp to work in film in Hollywood after having that experience. In fact, I remember once I got to Hollywood, one of my closer friends in my early Hollywood days, she too had interned at the White House. She was a part of a different intern class. She was a little bit younger than I was, but we both joked at the fact that we had interned at the White House in our earlier years, and now we were both working in Hollywood. She still, to my knowledge, works in the film industry in Hollywood. She wrote for the TV show Community for a number of years, and
Great show. They're coming out with a movie. Did you hear that?
I know I can't wait. I love that show. So inventive, so fun. Russo brothers on that. Yeah,
Gotta
it's
love
just
Joel. Joel's he's from Seattle, so
yeah, great
loving
guy.
that, loving that.
Mhm.
Odoi, you said that you totally support a young person doing this if you had someone in your family doing that. So, what kind of advice would you give someone that's considering a career in government? So maybe not specifically an internship at the White House, but hey, I want to go into government. What would you tell someone that's interested in that?
I would ask them to really consider the why behind the reason to do it. Working in government is not easy. The the change that comes about can move at a snail's pace. There's just so many difficulties and challenges there. If they want to be a public servant, then yes, pursue it and do so with gusto and do all they can to be able to do it well and with wisdom. But also, I would encourage them to avoid those the clutching of power for power's sake. It can be very intoxicating. Uh, the power of celebrity, the power of the electoral process and winning elections. I think that can blind many leaders. And I think there are a lot of leaders today that are trying to hold on to their power at the loss of having true positive influence in governance and shaping the society. And that's sad to me. I look at like some people that you've seen them go in their wayward way. Like they start off, they have one position and they feel adamant about it and they let go of it completely because, oh, well, power has told, has dictated that I need to release that in order to remain elected or to get this higher position. And you just wonder, like, where did you lose your moral rooting, your moral compass, your scruples? So I'd advise a young person to hold firm to why they're doing it, to do their best to be a public servant, to recognize the role is not about hoarding power, but of releasing it and supporting the the common man, and yeah, embracing that aspect of the opportunity.
Going full circle, I feel to some degree that you just described Lord of the Rings and Gollum to some degree. So maybe tell young people before you go into politics, watch the Lord of the Rings and understand that you should be able to find yourself in every single one of these characters.
Yeah, it's so true. We all have dark sides and issues, but work towards the light, work towards the things that are life-giving to you and to others.
Mm-hmm.
Avoid those things that will hinder that. And as long as you continue to persevere in that right direction, you can't lose. So.
We're talking about how the internet's just brought a spotlight or just real clarity on everything, but your definition of someone who's actually probably did do that right, that folks reflect on, is George Washington when he decided to end it 2 terms and he made a decision to relinquish his seat as president. That wasn't something that was mandated. It wasn't in the Constitution. It was, of course, later added after FDR. But he made that decision because he knew it would be best for the country to let go and not create some type of kingdom based off of him. So that's a good example of someone doing it right.
Strength of character. I think he experienced what it was like to be under the lordship of a king and probably knew the pains of that and was able to draw from that experience to limit his own power. So I think we have to remember and learn from those examples and recognize that as we lead and serve others, it's a privilege, it's an honor. We don't do it for our own self-aggrandizement, but for the benefit of others. So.
Yeah. Also, I just to add, I feel like if we can get to that place, there's just so much freedom in that.
Mm-hmm. And so much beauty. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. So you could relive one day from that internship 30 years ago. Your joints are feeling really good, Odoi. You're 19. You got lots of spring in your step. What would it be? Well, one day from that time.
One day. Gosh. I probably wish I'd taken up Monica Lewinsky and joining the interns for drinks or hanging out after. I was just too timid. And now in hindsight, I realized, man, who knows what would have happened that night? I would have learned something really simple. I don't know. Yeah, I think just generally speaking, I wish I'd invested more in the relationships. I've realized over time, relationships are what really matter. And if I had done
Yeah.
that, I think I would have experienced more joy from the experience. Yeah.
Great. Well, Odoi, you've just been a real pleasure. Do you have any final thoughts for us before we come to a close?
Oh, just to say thanks. And this has been a huge pleasure for me to be able to think back on a very exciting time of my life. It's one that 30 years since I every month or so, it probably comes up in conversation with folks. So that just shows how important of a period it was. So I was grateful for the experience and grateful for this time with you to be able to reflect upon it. So thank you.
Well, Doy, really my pleasure and a pleasure for everyone that got to listen in to this really interesting and significant conversation. And I'll just leave it with this. Doy, I really feel spending this last couple hours with you that if you had a chance to see Monica Lewinsky and you were back together with her and maybe the other interns, I think what I love about you is my gut tells me you would help her recollect that time when she was willing to help you out when you were a real sweaty guy on that August day, and you'd share that story with her, and you'd probably tell her what that meant to you and how her kindness was something that you've remembered throughout these decades. And the fact that that's what you'd focus on, and I know 100% you wouldn't mention anything around the scandal or whatnot, just really says a lot about you and how you really see people and how you care for people.
Oh yeah. I mean, she honestly, I have such a high degree of respect for her because of what it was like, what I'm assuming it would have been like for her to be in the public crucible for so long and still come out as a whole human being. I would certainly just extend my hand to her and say that I've appreciated and respected the way that she's navigated the challenges and hopeful that she's come out stronger and better for it. So,
Good word, Odoi. Well, thanks again for coming on to the show. Really appreciate you. And until next time, folks.
That's a wrap on the Wide Lens podcast. If today's episode broadened your view of history, please follow, rate, and review us. It makes a real difference. A heartfelt thanks to our guests for their story and to Sergei Shadrin for providing the music. Know someone who's witnessed a pivotal moment? Drop us a line at ideas@widelenspodcast.com. Their story could be next. Until next time, keep looking at history through the wide lens.